As speaker, I was not taught the history of the founding myth of our country, that we were founded on a myth of Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism and white supremacy. So if we're going to be truthful about our history, we have to not only take down the statues and put them in a space that is not in the public square, a space where others can come and learn about the founding myths of our country, which dehumanized people of color, which enslaved them, and which has continue to be maintained by our elected leaders. I wanted to read just briefly from a piece written by the Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, who is at the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary. She wrote this week, "Many Americans, horrified by the hate and violence on display in Charlottesville, exclaim, 'This is not America.' But the truth we need to know to actually root out white supremacy is that this is integral to America and has been from the very beginning. When America's Pilgrim and Puritan forebears fled England in search of freedom, they believed themselves descendants of an ancient Anglo-Saxon people who possessed high moral values and instinctive love of freedom." I truncate here, but they crossed the ocean and founded a country based on those values. In order to safeguard this vision, a pervasive culture of whiteness was born. Why? Because, simply put, not everybody that looks like an Anglo-Saxon in the United States is actually Anglo-Saxon. The perpetual vexing problem for the nation is that from its very beginnings, it has been an immigrant nation with migrants, even from Europe who were not Anglo-Saxon. And just to save time and allow others to speak, I'll conclude by saying that as a white person, I've benefited from the white privilege bestowed upon me by our founding myth that has dehumanized others who don't look like me. I'm in support of removing the statues, and I hope they can be moved to a place that is not a public park so that all members of our community can feel safe and welcome in public spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Alice. Dawson Smith. And then Emily. All right. And Dawson, let me call some other folks up. Daniel Pack, Danny Willems, Gene Amick, Brian Davis, and Andrew Russell English.
The outcome today of this particular issue is not only a reflection of our city's ability and willingness to absorb and extend both sympathy and empathy, but a testament to the integrity of its stance in appropriately representing our history. It is clear that opposition exists from the tragic events in Charlottesville to the hateful and low reactions of some of our own citizens to Mayor Gray's announcement to take initiative in removing. And to that, myself and many others say, it is not only obvious that figures, not only disrespectful in the context of their erection and the land in which they reside, that conjure and unveil the despicable hate, ignorance, and intolerance of our population, but it is pivotal. Allow me to explain. America, though not exclusively, has many times done what we call drop the ball. Now, usually when dropped, the reaction is that it rises again, back to the wielder's hand and ultimately control. With this particular issue, not only is it important to grasp tightly, but realize the lack thereof at a time when gravity is so powerful may result in the ball not returning. It is somewhat sad to mention reputation as a factor, when what is truly at the center of this is ethics. Yet it is by an objective system which they are intrinsically connected. Lexington is a beautiful city, my hometown, and one of the most remarkable places in our state of Kentucky. I press and ask dearly for the hearts and souls of those that suffered, still suffer, and are deeply and rightfully moved and passionate of their removal. Please, do not miss this precious opportunity for progression, justice, and leadership. For those that deceptively and distortedly rebuttal with the virtue of pride, whether Southern, Confederate, or even American, let us solemnly all remind ourselves it is pride that comes before the fall. It is so much more than moving statues. It's removing the sentiment of oppression from our identity. Thank you.
Emily?
My name is Emily Mosley, and I live in the 1st District. I feel very strongly that these statues should be moved out of Cheapside. I moved to Lexington in 2010, and I find it to be a very welcoming, inclusive, and generous city. When I realized the statues in Cheapside were of Confederate soldiers, it gave me pause. especially after learning the meaning of the word Cheapside and what had happened there. I understand that people fear change and that they are scared of erasing history. But these statues were erected for the sole purpose of distorting history. It was a move to preserve the lost cause of the Confederacy, which has helped preserve and encourage white supremacy. These statues were placed in Cheapside to intimidate Black Americans, to remind them of where they came from and who was in charge. It is time to remove these statues from our most public gathering area. I believe that these statues have no place on public land and that they would best be served to be located in a museum where their history can be fully explained. I think we can all agree that the renovation of the courthouse looks amazing, and I think it would be a real shame to have that beauty tarnished by these statues. DeBron Thomas has said, "The right time to do the right thing is always right now." Right now is our time and your time to do the right thing. This is not what we stand for. This is not who we are as a city of Lexington, and the wrongs and the failings of the past do not need to continue to define who we are. And by removing these statues, we can move forward as a more united and just Lexington. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Mr. Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Pack, and I live on West 6th Street. I'm a proud resident of Council District 1. And I just want to say that we've heard numerous arguments and pleas on Tuesday night as well as tonight, and we're going to hear more in favor of removing these statues from Cheapside to a more appropriate location. These are good arguments. We've also heard from the chief and probably before that neo-Nazis and white supremacists are planning to come to Lexington to protest moving these statues. I imagine that there are some members of our community and maybe even some members of this council that are frightened by that prospect. Why would we do something that essentially invites terrorists to our downtown? Why would we risk the violence, even deaths of innocent people like we saw in Charlottesville, Virginia, and in other cities? Because we are proud Kentuckians and we are Americans. We don't give in to terrorists. We don't bow to hate. We don't make decisions based on fear. We choose what is right because it is right, not because it is easy. So if fear of Nazis is part of the equation for you, if you are at all considering the potential of white supremacists being here in Lexington as part of your decision-making process, I urge you to put that aside and choose what is right for our entire community. And we all know that moving the statues is what's right. The last thing I need to say is that I recognize the privilege that allows me to make this statement so easily. As a white, straight man, I am not a target of their hate. So we who are privileged must commit to stand alongside those who are targeted, people of color, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, immigrants, people of Jewish descent, the differently abled, and women. And we must commit to stand alongside them. We must all stand together against hate and not surrender to it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Danny Willems. And let me call a few more folks. Brack Marquette, Herb Miller, Jessica Michter, Richard Francis, Phil Maxon, and Lillian Breslin. Danny, go right ahead.
Thank you, council members, for your service to our city and your time this evening. Thank you to the members of the Fayette County Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, and the other individuals protecting us all this evening. My name is Danny, and I live in District 4, well represented by Councilmember Lamb. I grew up gay in a small conservative city near Lexington. Every day I was reminded in some way in which my presence wasn't welcome, or how I was a lesser person than the citizens around me. I loved my city, but I was relieved when I moved to Lexington. For 9 years now, I have enjoyed the peace of mind from the protections of a fairness ordinance and a more welcoming community, and it has meant the world to me. I ruminate on that when I think about the way my black Lexingtonians feel about seeing markers every day in a position of honor downtown. If they want to dance at Sky Bar, they pass John C. Breckinridge, the man appointed Secretary of War, a war that was fought to keep their ancestors enslaved. If they want to enjoy the Lexington Farmers Market, they are reminded that the area isn't named Cheapside because the local farmers offer the best vegetable prices. And every day, they face job discrimination housing discrimination, and biases that most of us shrug off and ignore. Even in my LGBT community, Black Americans face lower annual income, lower housing, lower employment rates, and they're more likely to be attacked than their white counterparts. When my hometown recently decided not to vote in favor of a fairness ordinance, it rang loud and clear to me how much the City Council valued me and wanted me back. Such a symbolic move would have clearly spoken to my community that my home city cared about all of its citizens and welcomed their contributions. You will have a very important vote tonight, and I ask that you please consider what your vote today would say to the Black Lexingtonians who also call this community home. Thank you all.
Thank you, Danny. Jean Amick.
Hi, I live on Yorktown Road. I'm in Ms. Henson's district. First, I'd like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to be here, and especially for allowing this motion to come to a vote. I urge you to vote tonight to move the statues away from Cheapside, especially if you get or have been getting calls that are full of anger and hate. Because that's what it's really about. It's not about remembering history. Because if that were the case, we'd have statues of U.S. Grant. We'd have a statue of Thomas Hunt Morgan. We'd have statues of people other than that one period of time. It's appropriate now to move these statues to a different location. But the reason that we need to do this is the same as the reason that so many of us desire to have them moved. They're glorifications of an era of white supremacy and the men who sought to maintain that caste system. But America does not believe in a caste system, and we shouldn't glorify people who chose to commit acts of war against our country for the express purpose of continued slavery. Put these statues in a cemetery to honor the dead, or in a museum to be in context with those of Union officers. But don't leave them adjacent to a building that is supposed to be the local embodiment of liberty and justice for all. The men shown on these statues did not stand for those values. They are a constant reminder of slavery and white supremacy, and their presence, especially after significant public debate, would be a statement that the values the statues represent are of higher priority than liberty and justice for all. Some would argue that these men are no different than Washington or Jefferson, but that's not true. Their only claim to fame is their role as traitors to the United States. And it's time we stop treating as heroes people who were willing to commit treason against our country. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Jean. Brian Davis.
Who?
Oh, okay. Andrew English.
I don't need all that time, but I'll...
No, I'm sorry. He wanted to cede it to Russell. I don't know where he is.
Okay.
All right. Well, then we'll call Russell up in a few minutes. All right. We'll get to him. Next is Herb Miller. Herb, did I miss somebody?
Andrew Russell English.
Andrew Russell English, yes. Is Andrew here? Come ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you heard me. Okay, go right ahead, Andrew.
Russell, confusing.
Russell,
Pardon
all
my
right.
last name.
Gotcha.
I'm a constituent of Councilmember Brown in the 1st District. Just a few thoughts. I have a 2-year-old son. When I speak or act, I send him a message about what I align myself with and what I believe is right. If I say good morning to our neighbors every day, he'll follow suit, and he does. If I'm kind to his mother, I hope he will be more likely to treat his friends and partners with kindness. Intentional or not, my behaviors are a projection that my son watches intently, learning about my evolving efforts toward a best possible community. The work of this council is usually more subtle and complex than the work of setting an example of integrity and truthfulness for a child. In the instance of this resolution, however, I feel there's very little difference. With the eyes of the Commonwealth and the nation fixed on our city, we can't afford to pretend that these statues are simply hometown residents remembered for historical reasons. We must reckon with the fact that these statues are also symbols. Symbols that continue to project onto our city the system these men aligned themselves with, one that is defined by treasonous rebellion waged to preserve an oppressive system based on an idea of racial superiority. That idea, I think we can all agree, is inhuman, evil, and false. I would like to watch, along with my young son, as you vote unanimously to move these statues today. And I can't imagine one good reason why you'd want to set a different example for your children. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Herb Miller?
Mayor and members of the council, Mayor, before I begin, I want to say this is the first time in my professional career that I'm not up here representing someone else. But as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, not to act is to act, not to speak is to speak. So here I am. In 1795, the will of my ancestor, Richard Stone, said this: I leave to my beloved wife 23 Negroes, one Negro named Gloucester to my son Thomas, to my son Richard 3 Negroes of the names following: Jacob, a man; Hannah, a woman; and Jacob, a boy. To my granddaughter Anne, 2 Negroes in the names of Mill, a girl, and Ziab, a boy, and 1 feather bed and 1 leather trunk. So what does this have to do with these statues? Well, these statues are far more than the likenesses of historical people. As has been said, they are symbols. They were prominently placed as symbols, and they remain as symbols. They are a reminder of the ideals of these particular individual men who defended the ideals who they defended: a legal, economic, social, and moral system where human beings were bought, sold, and inherited just like furniture. So to me, this is much bigger than how we remember these individuals themselves. It's how we remember the ideals they represented. And being in the town square implies an approval, or at least a lack of condemnation, of the ideals behind them. And I've heard it said that relocating these statues is a sanitizing of history. But I say leaving them in the public place of honor is also sanitizing history. It perpetuates a myth that some people want to hold on to, and I get it. I was raised to value my Southern heritage, and I do, when it comes to manners and friendliness and sense of family and a way of life. But monuments such as these are not for reconciliation. They communicate a message of separation, aristocracy, superiority, and division. And these statues should be relocated to a respectful place of learning and reflection where the context of history can be included. In summary, the values represented by these symbols are not what we want to communicate to people who want to start businesses here, or visit us here, or raise a family here. Let's show that Lexington can be the welcoming community that we know it can be. So please keep the courage to stay the course. Thank you.
Thank you, Herb. Jessica Michter, Richard Francis, Phil Maxson, whoever's willing to come on up if I called your name.
I
Brack
think it's
Marquette.
Jessica Moeller. I have terrible handwriting.
Jessica, yes, of course.
My name's Jessica Moeller, and I'd like to choose to give my time to DeBron Thomas.
All right, okay. LeBron, thank you.
Good evening, City Council. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. First off, I would like to say to all of the people sitting here that I have spent many conversations with, thank you for lending your ears. Thank you for listening, and thank you for just in general being supportive. The last day and a half have been really stressful. I have had threats to my life, and I have not gotten very much sleep. I have been in transport constantly throughout the city, and I will be spending a lot of time couch surfing. But I come here to you today to ask that you unanimously vote today to remove the statues from Cheapside. A lot of time is spent on the statues and not on Cheapside, the space itself. The stories of folks like Will Lockett, who was hanged in 1929 at Cheapside for a crime he didn't commit. Henry Tandy, an African-American man who laid the bricks in which the courthouse that is there currently sits. So I ask of you again to please listen to the voices of the people. The eyes of the country are on Lexington, and I think that we have an opportunity to show to the rest of the world that we as a community will not stand up against hate, we will not stand up against the institution of white supremacy, and we will not stand to the ugliness that is this hatred that may or may not be coming to our town. In this moment, we must stand together. And I vow to each and every one of you that if you unanimously vote today, I will do everything that I can to ensure that we continue to spread a message of peace, love, and prosperity, because that is the Lexington that I know and love. My great-great-grandfather was a man named Abraham Jones who was born into slavery. And every time I step into Cheapside, I think of the atrocities that he had to face every day. He ended up buying a farm in Mount Peeler, Kentucky, that stayed in my family's name for over 100 years. Knowing that a man of his stature, born into slavery, not well educated, could buy land and do things that at the time could seem amazing, things that other people didn't even think were possible. So in the same sense, we have the same moment and opportunity to do the same, to do something that 130 years ago, I highly doubt anyone would say we would be having this conversation. And so we do this for the voices of the people who in 1887 could not speak, who in 1911 were barred from speaking. We do this for all of Lexington, and we do this to show the entire country that we stand together as one. So I end with one of my favorite quotes. Not sure if you all are familiar with Fred Hampton. I said this the other night. But Fred Hampton was a community organizer in Chicago. He was a member of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. He was the original founder of the Rainbow Coalition and said this: "We do not fight fire with fire. We fight fire with water. We do not fight racism with racism. We fight racism with solidarity." So today, I ask each and every one of you, in solidarity, please stand together with the rest of this city so we can take the next steps into moving these statues from Cheapside. Thank you very much.
Thank you, LeBron. Thank you very much. Richard Francis.
Yes, I think if we had our priorities straight, we'd be getting into the dusty shed where we put things that are removed from the courthouse lawn, and we'd get out the nativity scenes, get the dust off of them, get the Ten Commandments back out, and, you know, things that might offend a minority of people, so everybody, the majority, accepts the fact that, well, probably God has a good sense of humor on these things. So off they go into the shed behind the rakes and garden hoses. Anyway, I digress. If we had our priorities straight, that's what we'd be discussing, far more important than these statues. But since we're here, as a native Lexingtonian, growing up here and being a history major at UK and working at a couple of the museums here in central Kentucky and being the assistant curator of historic properties for a time, if your parents or grandparents or their parents were here, there wouldn't be all this milling around of explaining why Lexington has statues over here to its local heroes. The men excelled at what they did. They're internationally known, and they're studied to this day because of the way they conducted themselves during the war. And there isn't time in 3 minutes to go into how General Breckinridge saved the lives of all the black troops that he could over at Saltville, Virginia in October of '64, et cetera, et cetera. All he is a Confederate, so he's, deserves all of our condemnation, and that's all he was. Well, the war wasn't fought just about slavery by a long shot, in case you don't hear that anywhere else, okay? Anyway, why are they over there on the lawn? Because Lexingtonians wanted them there. And if you had gone through this community during the war and seen all the freshly turned dirt in the cemeteries and all the displaced people with no possessions or food, living off the charity of anybody they could find in the community, and there was federal armed troops at every bridge and ferry, the Shakers, the pacifists, incidentally, were the first people to accept blacks on an equal basis into the community. The federal government had sunk all their ships to the bottom of the Kentucky River because they might be able to be used by the Confederacy. Kentucky was captured territory. It was an armed camp. The federal government abused its authority. And before that war was over, the first modern war is what a lot of professors have liked to call the uncivil war, which was, of course, a war for independence. A civil war is where you're fighting for the same territory, like in England, the same crown. Here it was Richmond versus Washington, two different territories. It was a war for independence, and standing on the principle...
Richard, excuse me. We have the 3-minute...
are we there?
Yes, sir. And appreciate your passion, certainly do, and appreciate the lessons that you're sharing with us. But we are past 3 minutes.
Okay,
right.
well...
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Study your history, folks.
Yes,
There's
sir.
a whole different side. I feel like I'm
Okay,
in Michigan
we
right
hear
now.
you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, yes, sir. Phil Maxson.
Thank you very much for listening to me. My name is Phil Maxson, and I live on Clearwater Way across the street from Veterans Park. I am also a native Lexingtonian and also was a history major he's talking about, and I also teaching classes on Kentucky and the Civil War. One thing I do want to make sure of is that these statues are not removed from downtown. I do want to make sure about that. So I have an idea late at the end here where they might go if you move them from Cheapside. I do recommend that you add another statue to Cheapside, and that is a statue of an African-American soldier, Union soldier, from the 116th USCT Infantry Regiment, that many of them were from Fayette County, who were formed and trained at Camp Nelson, Kentucky, just south of here, just in Jessamine County, who fought at Petersburg, who were at Appomattox, fought against Lee's troops at Petersburg. They were also at Appomattox. 2 months after Appomattox, they went to Texas with Gordon Granger, General Gordon Granger. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him, but under his command, and they were the ones that helped announce the freedom to the slaves in Texas, called now today celebrated as the Juneteenth. Gordon Granger, as a matter of fact, is buried right here in Lexington, Kentucky. It's a cemetery. He's not a native Lexingtonian. He was stationed here for a while, and he married a Lexingtonian. Anyway, I think it would be very good to have a victorious Union African-American soldier from the 116th statue on the Short Street side of Cheapside. The reason for Short Street, because to me it's very symbolic. You talk about the slave auctions at Cheapside. Well, a lot of slaves were sold at the slave jails on Short Street. Robarb's, Pullman slave jails. The whipping post was on Short Street. I think it would be very symbolic to have that on that Short Street side. Now, I also do want to say one thing about the older statues, and I don't really care much about the John Hunt Morgan, but John C. Breckinridge, I do want to say, I'm not going to forgive him for what he did. He was a traitor, but he is still, he's the only, his statue down there, he is not in uniform. He was the only vice president of the United States from Lexington. He was from one of the most important families in Kentucky's history, which was split. His uncle, Reverend Robert J. Breckinridge, was an advisor to Lincoln and helped keep Kentucky from seceding. And when he came back from Lexington after the war, he made a statement. He vigorously denounced the Ku Klux Klan. So it would be ironic if the Ku Klux Klan came in to try to save his statue.
Phil, I'm sorry you've got that 3-minute mark again.
All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Brack Marquette.
My name is Brack Marquette. I have been a resident of Lexington in central Kentucky for nearly 40 years, a native of northern Kentucky, and so I consider both my home, but this is my current home. And I want to say that I'm very heartened and proud of the majority of what has been said here this evening and the initial decision that the council has made. I hope you will follow through on that same decision. My interest in this issue has gone on for quite a while, ever since it became a public issue. It's an academic one first. My studies at LSU as a graduate student were all about Southern speech making after the Civil War, and about 99% of it was made and became famous in front of the dedication of monuments like the two we're discussing tonight. The second reason I have an interest is because I have and was given 4 names. Maybe some of you know somebody with 4 names, but mine are John C. Breckinridge Marquette. I go by Brack out of no embarrassment, it's just shorter. But it does reflect the fact that I am a Kentuckian. My families have been here since the earliest days, and they were among them slave owners and not, Confederates and Union soldiers. One side of the family admired Mr. Breckinridge to the extent that shortly after his death, they named one of their sons after him. I have no record and do not know why, other than, as Dr. William C. Davis writes in Breckinridge's biography, he was, at the time of his death, an extraordinarily popular Kentuckian, regardless of what had taken place. And I'm sure that was among certain constituencies. My dad got the name, and then I got it. And I'm proud to have it because I'm very historically inclined, but I have always thought of it as being the name of a vice president. I haven't said anything up to this point because it's not that big of a deal. Those few people who knew the circumstance asked me. Some asked me if I would speak tonight. And I'm glad I haven't said anything up to this point because I have only today come.
You're up to that. You can probably finish that thought, though.
To the
I think
realization.
we probably want to hear it, where you're going. Yes.
That the oath to the Constitution.
There's a suggestion here to give a motion to give 30 seconds more. Will that work?
Please.
Go.
Thank you.
I think without objection. All right.
That the oath to the Constitution is an important oath to every American. And there is no distinction between Mr. Breckinridge, Mr. Morgan, and others. We're not rewriting history. We are correcting history as the times have always found us doing.
All right.
generation in and generation out.
Thank you.
I support this decision
All right.
and
Thank you.
hope that it occurs.
Thank you. All right. Have I called Lillian Brislin? And then let me call some more folks. Burl McCoy, J.R. Zerkowski, Carol Jordan, Alexandria Johns.
Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Lillian Brislin. I'm a proud resident of the Fighting First and so proud of my councilman, Mr. James Brown. I didn't plan to speak tonight, but after calls for solidarity and calls from Take Back Cheapside for all of us to lend our voices to the cause, I saw a podium, and as an academic, I grabbed some paper and scribbled notes, and so here we go. I was scared to speak tonight, and the realization and the recognition of that fear, despite my massive privilege and my security, is what compels me to stand here shaking before you, with the hope that I can lend my voice in some small and inadequate way for those whose fears of retaliation are all too real. And I want to speak about the experience that many of us shared on the Commerce Lex trip to South Carolina last year, to Charleston, where we sat in Mother Emanuel Church and heard from the pastor there about the horrible, heartbreaking aftermath of the murders within those hallowed halls. We were called on then to serve our community by confronting the uncomfortable and often ugly truths of racism in our past and present, to deal with the murders fueled by hate, racist hate, that is a more horrible manifestation of our nation's much deeper illness of white supremacy. And we now, as a city, come to such a long overdue moment, an opportunity to take a first and crucial step along the path of healing, of acknowledging past wrongs and starting to do right by our sisters and brothers of color. To hide behind bureaucracy in this moment, to equivocate with its tediousness, would be a gross act of cowardice. Lexington must send an unequivocal message that we fear no truth of our past or present, that hate has no place in our streets and it will not be sown in our hearts, that we stand together in solidarity, undivided and resolved to do right by each other. We must love each other fearlessly. Please, my council, my city, take these statues down and let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Sam Flora.
My name is Sam Flora. I'm a resident of Lexington. I'm also the commander of the local camp of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, which is named after John C. Breckinridge. There's been a local camp of this organization in Lexington since 1897. Sons of Confederate Veterans is a nonprofit, non-sectarian, non-political, historical, and genealogical organization dedicated to the preservation of the Confederate soldiers' history and heritage. This organization has for decades publicly condemned the misuse of our Confederate symbols and monuments by all groups who espouse an agenda of racial hatred. We condemn the actions of any group attempting to use these monuments for their own extremist political agendas. History and art can often be controversial, but eradicating art, which some oppose, is simply censorship, a damaging instinct our nation has always resisted from its earliest foundations of liberty. Erasing history and art that is disagreeable denies us the benefit of studying it and learning from it. The moving of these monuments would be a sanitizing of the history of Lexington. It will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. That money would be much better spent by adding to our shared understanding of history by placing a monument on the old courthouse grounds to the African Americans from Lexington who served in the Union Army. Our SCV camp would support such a project. We need to add to our understanding of history, not take away from it. We ask that the council not stampede into making such a decision, especially when the timing of doing so would appear to be an invitation to bring discord from Charlottesville to Lexington. We ask that the monuments remain. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Burl McCoy, did I get Burl? There he is. Come on, Burl. And then J.R. Zerkowski.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the council. Mr. Mayor, my name is Burl McCoy, and I'm a representative of Morgan's Men. Morgan's Men is a nonprofit organization made up of descendants of men that rode with General John Hunt Morgan, and also other people of interest in the Civil War, and particularly of Mr. Morgan. It was established in 1868 at the Phoenix Hotel upon the reburial of Morgan in Lexington, Kentucky. It's a nonprofit organization open to any person. Obviously, we oppose the moving of the Morgan statute and of the Breckinridge statute. I've reflected on this, and I've been in Lexington for quite a while, and I wondered, well, why did they put Morgan and Breckinridge up there? And I reject the idea that it was put up there to frighten blacks. I reject the idea that it was put up there as white supremacists. Those statutes were put up there because Morgan and Breckinridge were leaders of men, and they are still leaders of men. The Army Ranger School studies Morgan's tactics today, and I, as an infantry officer some 30 or 40 years ago, studied them when I was at Fort Benning. Morgan was, not only was he a general, but he was on the city council, he was on the school board, he was captain of the fire department, he was a member of the Masonic Lodge, along with Breckinridge, and he was also a captain in the state guards in the Mexican War. So this gentleman, this general, was a leader of men. So I would suggest to the council, one, that we leave them where they are for now. One, you don't know where you're going to put them. Two, you don't know where you're going to get the money to move them, and you don't even know how much it's going to cost. And three, you're most likely going to lose your tax credit, contrary to what the newspapers reported. So who knows how much this is going to cost? And not counting if we have to have the police here because of a group of crazies. So I would suggest that haste makes waste, and you're going to waste the money of the taxpayers of Fayette County. Why don't you put it to a referendum to see what the taxpayers want to do? And I would suggest to you that although you can hold your signs up and you can make your T-shirts, 68% of the people tonight do not want to move the statue. Just for clarification, Cheapside was named after Cheapside Market in London. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McCoy. All right. Next is Mr. Zurkowski, J.R. Zurkowski.
Good evening. I'm J.R. Zurkowski. I live on Ridgeway Road in Chevy Chase. I'm sort of known here in Lexington recently as the person that started the Lexington United Interfaith Encounters. In the past 48 hours since I spoke on Tuesday, I've spoken with dozens of interfaith and community leaders, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist. Each has reiterated a common theme. We must not only condemn racism, hatred, and violence, but also stand in solidarity with the victims. Standing in solidarity with the victims, those who are harmed, injured, or who were killed, demands that we respect hallowed ground, made sacred by the wholesale buying and selling of brothers and sisters, men, women, aged, infirm, youth, children, endowed with the same dignity that we all share, but without the privilege and the good fortune that we all enjoy. This demands that statues and monuments indicating and glorifying anything to the contrary on that hallowed ground be removed. I stand with victims who have no voice today except mine and yours. They were called bucks and wenches when put up for auction at Cheapside. I call them, and we call them, brothers and sisters of sacred memory. This evening, there is a moral imperative that your vote must ratify and verify. Thank you.
Right, thank you, JR. Let me make a suggestion while we're here. Several of you have brought signs, and I think there's an appreciation and acknowledgement of that. Your presence is really known. But I sense that some of the council members may think that, and I may think that as well, is maybe a little bit too much of a demonstration. So if you all maybe would want to, I'm not going to say don't, but just you might want to refrain from that a little bit. All right? Okay. Just an encouragement. All right. Next is Carol Jordan, and then Alexandria Johns. And then I'm going to call some more folks up. P.G. Peeples, Matt Bryant Cheney, Jessica Short Long, Darrell Davis, Charles Payne, and Carla Blanton.
Hi, my name is Carol Jordan. I live on Merrick Drive. I'm in Bill Farmer's district. I moved to Lexington in 1990 when I was in my mid-20s, so I've been here almost 30 years. Before living here, I lived in Tennessee. My roots are very deep in the South. Both sides of my family are from the South, some of whom were Confederate soldiers. I understand being a Southerner. Having said that, I am very offended by the statues at Cheapside Park. A sacred space where men, women, and children were once sold is not an appropriate place for the statues of Confederate generals. I do not want to erase or sanitize history. I want a more complete story. We have not forgotten the atrocities of the Holocaust, nor has Germany. They know they do not need statues of Hitler to remember the past. Removing the statues that glorify two men who fought against the Union is not sanitizing history. Given the events in our country recently in Charlottesville, Durham, Baltimore, New Orleans, Louisville, Gainesville, even Los Angeles, it is our turn to act. The time is now. Not only is Lexington watching, the nation is watching. History is watching. If you vote against this, I believe you will be aligning yourself with white nationalists, white supremacists, and Nazis. Nazis. History is watching. I sincerely hope for a unanimous vote to move the statues. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carol. Alexandria Johns.
Ladies and gentlemen of the council, hi. Mayor Gray, hi. Excuse me while I read from my phone. A lot of fine gentlemen have talked tonight about history, and they've taught me some things that I didn't know about history, but this is not about history anymore. As of Saturday, things have changed. With the nation at large trying to make sense of itself, the statues at Cheapside are no longer simple representations of our past. No. Those statues and what you decide to do with them will be a telling representation of our future. Like many other cities, we have been called upon to send a message to ourselves, to all Americans, and to those who would shirk their patriotism to stand under the many flags of white supremacy, that Lexington, Kentucky will not stand idle in the face of bigotry or be cowed into silence. With the events in Charlottesville looming large, it must be now, not later. We have a duty not to forget the history we were built upon, but to begin to tackle it with honesty and compassion. If those statues were placed because Lexingtonians wanted them to be there, then let's move them, because that's what Lexington wants now. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you getting us to this point. I look forward to you moving us forward. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alexandria. P.G. Peeples.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm P.G. Peeples. I'm president of the local urban league. For For about over 20 years, the Urban League was housed in what is now the 21C Hotel. My office was on the 4th floor on the upper street side of the building. Every day as I looked out my window, you know what I saw. I never paid that much attention to the statues until one day I was sitting in my office and a young man came in, and he and a crew were doing some work in one of the buildings downtown. And he was just beside himself, and Mr. Peeples, follow me. There's something I must show you. So I followed him, and we went into the bowels of one of the buildings that border Cheapside. Some of you in this room may know the rest of this story. But he carried me back into the bowels there, and I saw shackles where the slaves were held as they were being prepared to take to Cheapside to be sold. What a revelation for me to see that. I went back to my office, and from that day to today, I associated the symbols. The Confederate outside my window, and the shackles that I saw in the basement. Well, there was nothing I can do about the shackles because that's on private property. But tonight, I can do something about the statue. I can appeal to you and ask for a unanimous vote to please follow the request of the mayor and his administration, and let's move the statue. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, PG. Mr. Matt Cheney. And I'm going to call some more folks here while we're at it. Charles Payne. Did I call? Oh, already called Charles. And Carla, already called. Reverend C.B. Akins. Reva Russell English. Ondine Quinn. Andrew Bowling. And Marilyn Dishman.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Bryant Cheney. I live off Lone Oak Drive in the 11th District, and I want to thank Peggy Henson's office for being in contact with me today when I contacted them. And I thank all of you for the work that you do for our city. I've come today to support the Take Back Cheapside movement because they asked me to be here. They put out a call yesterday asking people to come and speak and to support their movement. I want to ask, as many others have tonight, that this council vote unanimously to remove the statues of John Hunt Morgan and John Cable Breckenridge from Cheapside Park. I would also like to ask that the statues not be moved to another public park in Lexington, such as Veterans Park. Instead, I would suggest that the statues find a home in a museum or a Civil War battlefield, such as the Perryville Battlefield State Historic Site or a similar location. As a father, as a member of a multiracial family, as a person of faith, as a taxpayer, and as a teacher of American literature and Southern culture and a scholar, I beg this council to remove these statues. Please choose to honor the history and memory of those people known as slaves, whose lives were ruined at Cheapside Park, and whose suffering and horror was made worse by people like John Hunt Morgan and John Cable Breckenridge. I've been reading a lot about the history of hate groups such as the KKK and others. And in my reading, I learned that the reason that that organization chose to wear white garb and sheets over their faces was in part because of intimidation, but it was also to honor dead Confederate soldiers and to represent and symbolize them. We continue to honor those Confederate soldiers by keeping the statues in our city. And I'd ask that you stop that. Thank you.
All right. Who's up next? Come ahead. Just come ahead. Jessica?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I got a good guess in there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Short-Long. I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Kentucky and a Quincy alum. Now, I grew up in, I guess, the heart of Southern pride, a small town in Kentucky. I mean, everyone had a rebel flag because no one was going to tell Southerners what to do. I mean, my grandfather played John Hunt Morgan in a town pageant. I mean, my father was thrilled when I got into transit and we went and saw John Hunt Morgan sword. And we went and toured the Hunt Morgan house. So then I started hearing where Confederate displays were hurting, I guess, the emotionally the well-being of African Americans. And at first, that old Southern pride kicked in, and I thought, oh, well, they're being too sensitive. I'm not going to change because, I'm not racist. I'm not holding this flag whatever, because I'm a racist. But then a low voice said, wait a minute, are you dictating someone else's life experience to them? Well, that gave me pause, and I started having a debate within myself. And this small voice said, tell me, is a rebel flag or a statue or anything worth making your black brothers and sisters feel unwelcome? Is it worth it? No. It is absolutely not worth it. And thank you.
I don't think there's objection.
With that in mind, removing the statues won't erase history, but will make it less painful for the people who suffer from its memory. It's not going to hurt us, so it's the only thing we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Daryl Davis.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council people. Some of y'all may know me. I've been downtown for 25 years, walked Cheapside every day for 25 years, except on the weekend. I noticed those statues every day. Many times people's asked me, what direction? Where do I go? Where do I find this? And I found myself in front of those statues helping people. And it gave me long pause to think that I'm working down here. I always felt bad about them. And I never knew who to talk to or what it would come to who to talk to get them to move. But those statues hurt me every day that I worked downtown. And I hope I always had a smile to tell people, hey, this is the place to go. I hope I was a good ambassador for Lexington. But those statues are very hurtful for people of color. And I hope the council people vote unanimously to move them. Thank you.
Carla, come right on.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Carla Blanton. I'm here on behalf of Commerce Lexington, where I serve as chair of the board. A big part of the role of the Chamber of Commerce is to help the business community grow. And how do we do that? We do that by working to create the environment and opportunity for economic prosperity and a quality of life for those in Central Kentucky. After reaching out to our executive board, we felt strongly that in order to sustain and further strengthen our vibrant community, we all must do what we can to make Lexington welcoming for all. As such, Commerce Lexington supports Mayor Jim Gray and the Urban County Council's efforts to move the Confederate statues away from one of the city's central gathering spots. Lexington is a welcoming community, and this decision will help reinforce that all of Lexington, including downtown, is a place for everyone to feel comfortable and enjoy. Outside influences that attempt to spread hate and bigotry are not acceptable and will not overpower the compassion and respect that we have for all segments of our community. When Commerce Lexington took 200 people to Charleston, South Carolina during our leadership visit last year, one of the key takeaways was Charleston's response to the terrible mass shooting at Mother Emanuel Church. Born from that trip were the courageous conversations that are ongoing to this day throughout our community. By coming together and learning more about one another, our needs, our challenges, our similarities, and our differences, we recognize that we can better impact positive change for our community. How our community reacts to something like this will define that community for generations. Let's make sure that we continue to build a Lexington that is open and welcoming for all segments of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Charles Payne.
Hello, my name is Charles Payne. I'm from Fred's district, the 8th district. I'm president of the River Park Neighborhood Association, and some of you may recall me and our efforts to repurpose the Trent Boulevard property. So, to borrow a phrase from my daughter, I identify as a conservative. Some people might even call me a right-winger. I go to a fundamental independent Baptist church. I recognize that we live under a constitutional republic, and as such, then, I'm a firm believer in preserving all aspects of the Constitution. That said, I support the mayor and the proposition to send the issue to the state for the relocation of the statues at the Cheapside property. There's a lot of passion surrounding this issue, both locally and nationwide. In 2013, however, the Washington Post reported that there are an estimated 60,000 slaves in America today, contemporary slavery. I wonder if we all couldn't get as passionate about that issue and stamp out contemporary slavery just as we work to correct the injustices of the past. Thank you for your service to the citizens of Lexington, and God bless.
Thank you, Charles. Reverend C.B. Akins.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council members. My name is C.B. Akins, Sr., and for the past 34-plus years, I've been pleased to serve as pastor of the First Baptist Ragtown Church on Leestown Road. I've also been intimately engaged in continuous improvement efforts in our city, as collectively we have worked to make it better. removing the Confederate statues from Main Street, Lexington, and what is soon to be our Welcome Center is yet another step in that continuous improvement process. I do hope Lexington Cemetery will allow the statues to be moved there, where the bodies of these men are already interred. The geographic symbolism is apparent to me as we seek to bury negative, harmful perceptions that have caused us to demean, degrade, and devalue many of our own citizens. These statues are constant reminders of an era in our history in which most of us take no pride today. It is far past time to bury divisive pride that never has and will not now propel us towards a future that is right and equitable for all our citizens. Clergy persons of all persuasions, academicians from every campus, business persons from every trade must come out of the shadows and recognize that silence is indeed a vote that will prove to be on the wrong side of history. We must take a strong public stand for our city. This is not the time to waffle or equivocate. Frederick Douglass once said, "I prefer to be true to myself, even at the hazard of incurring the ridicule of others, rather than to be false and to incur my own abhorrence." This is not about being popular, political, or even profound. It's just about doing what's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Akins. Reva? Reva English? No? Undyne? Oh, okay. All right. Oh, okay, Russell. Yes, sir.
How are you guys doing? I just want to thank everybody that's here in support of Take Back Cheapside. I think most people in this room know that I want to move the statues, so I'll be pretty brief. I just want to talk about one of the first times that I encountered Confederate imagery or iconography. It was my junior summer. I am from Paris, Kentucky. I went to Bourbon County High School. We had to register for classes, so my grandmother took me to the high school to register for classes. Now, like I said, I grew up in Bourbon County, so throughout my adolescence, I saw plenty of Confederate imagery and didn't really think that much about it. In fact, my school had Muddy Truck Day, so it's deep in that type of thing. So as we're walking in to the building, I see just a truck with a Confederate flag on it, and he's playing a country song. And the country song is talking about hanging niggers. And that's the first time that I realized what those symbols really meant. I was afraid today at some point. I was afraid for my family. I was afraid for my friends that were in the struggle with me. I was afraid for this city and afraid for people who aren't necessarily even involved in what's going on right now. But I guess what I'm trying to say is now is not the time for that fear. I've also heard a lot of people in, of course, support of the statues, and that's what let me know that I should speak today, because all I heard from those people was fear. I heard their fear of being erased, not necessarily being erased, but being taken from a prominent position in our society. Mayor Gray said at the very beginning of this meeting that they secured private funding in order to move these statues if that time came. And I heard countless people talk about things like taxes. You're not listening. I heard countless people talk about where the statue is going to go when Mayor Gray is working on that right now and stated as such. I just think when we come to this issue, if we can't let go of our fear, then this whole American experiment, is in its last days. We must stand up for every person in our community, and until we stand up for every person in our community, none of us will be free. Racism hurts every single person in this room. If you believe that black people are less, you will vote for things that give black people less. But what you don't realize is you give yourself less One of the things I do is I study healthcare a lot. And I know that Medicaid and programs like that are synonymous with black people. But some, like the top 5 counties in this state that have the most Medicaid usage are some of our rural counties. They need things like that. But some of those rural counties have some people in it, and cities as well have some people in it that believe that people shouldn't have those things. And when they don't believe that those people have those things, that karma does come back around to them. So like I said, racism hurts every single person in this room. And until every person addresses that, we will never win. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Undine Quinn.
My name is Ondine Quinn, and I live in the 1st District. I'm glad that we're here today, and I appreciate you hearing us today. And these statues have got to go, and I'm looking forward to your unanimous vote on that decision. I wish that I could say that Lexington is better than the violence and hate we see every day on the news, but we're not. We have allowed these hateful relics to persist, and it wasn't until a black-led group started to advocate for their removal did folks start to pay some attention. And it wasn't until someone died in Charlottesville that you hurried up to this moment. But I'm still glad we're here, and we must take these statues down. But I'm hoping that your work doesn't end with this issue. Moving these statues is one of many actions our city and you can take to address white supremacy and prioritize racial equity. But know that moving these statues won't suddenly make Lexington a hate-free place. It won't guarantee that Lexington is a safe and welcoming place for people of color. We've heard there may be Nazis in our town today. Sadly, we've had Nazis in our towns for years. Your leadership on this issue matters today, but it cannot end here. This is your moment to show that you are listening to people of color. This is your moment to begin to serve us bravely, without fear of discomfort, without fear of not being reelected. Only then, when racists and people with hate in their heart know that they're not going to be comfortable living here, will you know that you're doing your job. Thank you.
Thank you, Undine. Marilyn? I'm sorry, Andrew Bowling, and then Marilyn.
Hello. Thank you. I was struck earlier when someone else admonished those attending here to read our history, because I do read our history a lot, and that seems to be a sticking point for a lot of people opposed to taking these statues down. They say that it's a matter of history, that removing these statues erases our history. And I will be honest with you, I wish the way to mend the wounds that racism, white supremacy, and colonization has inflicted on this world were so easy that we could fix it by just removing 2 statues. But we know it's not that simple. In truth, statues are not the vehicles on which our history travels. Those are called books. Books, in my opinion, have been keeping a richer, far more detailed history of our country than any statue ever could. And it is unfortunate that the people who have been most vehemently opposed to the removal of these statues, the white supremacists we saw in Charlottesville and the white supremacists who threaten Lexington now, it's unfortunate that they cannot appreciate the value of books, but perhaps that is because they come from a tradition of burning books in bonfires. Maybe if they didn't, they could appreciate that the removal of these statues is not of our society. The history of this country should not be forgotten, but preserved so that it will remind all of us, but especially those of us with the privilege and social capital that comes with whiteness, of the debts that remain unpaid to people of color, to black people, and to everyone else who has been targeted by oppression in this country, this state, and this city. Not only should we remember this history because of the debt owed to the victims of oppression who came before us, but also because of the debt owed to the survivors of depression here today. Removing these statues so that no one should ever have to stand in the shadow, and maybe the literal shadow, of white supremacists is the first step, but it's not the last step. And that is why I encourage each of you to vote unanimously to remove those statues from Cheapside Park. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Marilyn Dishman.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak again. I hadn't planned to, but I know that when I left here Tuesday, some of you were not convinced of the need to remove the statues. So I want to impress upon you, none of us here wants to erase history, but we do want it to be presented fairly and truthfully. If you're that interested in preserving history, why aren't there monuments of Harriet Tubman, of other blacks? Why isn't there a monument to Henry Clay's servant who sued him for her freedom and won? To me, that's a big deal, especially for a woman and a slave, okay? Now, I want to take you back again to Tuesday. If you bear with me, close your eyes and pretend that you are an African female slave. In God's eyes, you're married. But in the middle of the night, while you're sleeping in the same bed with your husband, the white slave master comes to get you to comfort himself. How would you like it if that were your wife, your mother, your sister, your daughter? I don't think anybody in here would like that. And suppose she gave him a hard time. Then she was beaten. She was beaten if she looked him in the eyes. We couldn't even look white people in the eyes. That was considered disrespectful. So I ask everyone in here, why would you want to honor someone who treated you like that? I don't think you'd want to if you really thought about it, or if you were in my position. And take a good look at me. Do I look like your typical African? You know why I'm a little bit different? My blood has been diluted by those white slave masters taking advantage of my ancestors. I can't escape the color I am, nor can I escape my history, but I can damn sure do something about the present and hopefully the future. I do hope that everyone in here can understand what we as people of color have had to endure and are continuing to endure. Have I ever feared for my life? Yes. We were threatened when we desegregated the schools in Scott County, I as a child, and my father as a horse trainer. But it didn't stop us, people. And it's not going to stop me now. And above all, I think of Mark Barnard as a friend of mine. I know that he will take care of me. I know that he will take care of each one of you because he's a good man. He has a good heart. And he's going to make sure that Lexington is safe from any hatred, any person full of hatred. So I say unto you, even though I can't help you, don't be afraid. Be fearless. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you. And Councilmember Plumman was going to offer a motion to extend time, and she didn't even need it. All right. Marcia Moores Charles and Persia Newman, Shasta Valley, Ginger Southwick, Stephen Katz, Janet Hewitt, and Charles Young. Reverend.
I'm Marcia Morris Charles. I live at 3537 Line Drive, which inherits View. Good evening, Mayor and Council, and thank you again for allowing us as citizens to speak to things of importance to us. When I spoke to you on Tuesday afternoon, I shared the stories of two of my African-American parishioners whose ancestors were bought at a slave auction at Cheapside. I asked you then to imagine the deep hurt and yes, the anger at the symbolism of the statues in question and to look in your hearts to do the right thing by voting to relocate them. Tonight, I again appeal to you to confirm the unanimous decision you made Tuesday. And although I realize you have constituents that do not agree with these actions, and we have certainly heard from some of them, instead of looking at this situation with a lot of stress, which I know it certainly can be, I'm going to invite you to look at the wonderful opportunity that you have as leaders of this great city. I count it a tremendous blessing to be able to stand before you for a second time and advocate for our African American brothers and sisters. What an opportunity we all have to be a part of the right side of history. What a chance to have part of our legacy reflect that we were humble enough and courageous enough to look at something that we know is wrong and make it right. That's the opportunity before you tonight. Not to undo the damage, the tremendous damage to the emotions of our African American brothers and sisters, but certainly to offer some degree of emotional restitution. And to be on record that you were indeed brave enough to use your leadership position to do what's right. As a Christian minister, I often rely on biblical scripture to guide my life, and at least I try to give it an honest effort. I'm reminded of one of the Psalms of David when all around him seemed hopeless, armies and enemies coming from every direction, no light in sight. So David's crying out, and it seems to me that in that cry, I can hear the echoes of our black ancestors joining it. Have compassion on me, Lord, for I'm weak. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony. I'm sick at heart. How long, O Lord, until you restore me? How long? My fellow citizens, Mayor Gray and council, and specifically those of us who identify as white, perhaps we can answer the cry coming from beneath the hallowed ground of Cheapside with an undoing of what our ancestors caused. As we respond to the question, how long, with this answer, too long, way too long. We're going to fix it.
Thank you, Reverend. Ms. Newman? No? Okay. Shasta Valley? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Shasta Valley. Shasta. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm Dr. Valley of District 5. I understand by standing here tonight, I am putting a target on my head, just like many before me. John Brown, Harriet Stowe, William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Henry David Thoreau, Orrin Burbank Cheney, Douglas MacArthur, Nancy Wake, Elsie Ott. These are the names of Americans, men and women, black and white, who are the heroes of our American history, who have given their lives fighting against slavery, against the Holocaust, fighting for the American dream, that all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which are the preservation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are the soldiers that deserve statues. These are the war heroes that deserve to be celebrated in our town centers. I also came here chasing the American dream, legally, of course. I escaped apartheid South Africa with my family to come to the land of the free, supposedly celebrating my freedom, a land that would give me opportunities, give me rights, the right to vote, the right to get an education, to own a bank account, to own property, right to make my own medical decisions, the right to be treated as an equal. And I exercised those rights fully. I waited my due turn. I applied for citizenship. I got it. I went to college. I became a doctor. And now I practice at UK, serving many low-income Kentuckians at virtually no cost to them. But not a day goes by that these patients of mine take every opportunity to let it be known that I am not welcome here. From the moment that I've stepped foot in the United States, I've been told by mouth and fists that I am not American looking enough, that I need to go back to where I come from, and that there is no place for me here. My skin color has oppressed me in a third world country, and it continues to oppress me in a country that is supposed to embrace equality. I cannot believe I'm standing here in 2017 fighting for principles that I fought for in 1994 in apartheid South Africa, in a land that was supposed to advocate for equality, life, pursuit of happiness. So prove it to me. Take down those Confederate statues and show the world that Americans really fight for freedom.
All right, thank you. Ginger Smithwick.
My name is Ginger Smithwick, and I cede my time to Aaron Presley.
Aaron?
Thank you all for hearing me. Part of me is very glad to be here in front of you, and I feel blessed that this room is full and that you're all here listening. But I also feel amazed and shocked and discouraged that any of us have to be here today discussing this issue when there are so many things that would be better holders of our time. I actually had a little speech written before I came, but I waited outside for a couple of hours, and I was amazed. I didn't feel angry anymore, and I didn't feel like I had to be mad, because the people out there, the people that put you in office, the people that pay their taxes and love this city and work here and have children here and want to see us prosper, these people are outside, and they expect you to vote yes and to move these statues. And they don't do it out of hate. None of us hate history. None of us hate our neighbors. We don't want to take away anything from anyone. What we want to do is show that we know that things have been taken away from our African American brothers and sisters. And we want to restore something to them if there's any way possible that we can do that. We cannot erase history, and we don't want to. We don't want to rewrite history. We don't want to pretend it didn't happen. What we want to do is respect everyone that is here. I'm sure all of you know that our state motto, what is it? Can someone? United we stand, divided we fall. I'm sure most of, not all of you knew that. I hope so anyway. The point is that when that motto was chosen for our state, it was true. And today it is still true. If we are united, we are strong. If we stand next to each other, we are strong. There's nothing we can't do if we all come together. But these statues are standing right between us. It's no different than putting up a wall. This is shame that we're putting on display and parading as something that we're proud of, people that we want to commemorate. And how can you commemorate something without condoning its behavior? I don't think it's possible. And I can tell you that there are hundreds of people standing outside right now dying to get in here, and that they all feel the exact same way. There is no one outside with hate in their heart. Everyone is itching to get in here to tell you the same thing that I'm telling you, which is thank you for coming to action. Thank you for voting on this. And thank you for not letting us down, because we know that you are going to vote to relocate the statues. Everyone outside kind of has the same idea, and that is we want to support each other. We want to support the people in here, and we want to minimize the damage, if we can, that's already been done. Again, you know, I feel blessed to be here, and I thank you for hearing me, but before I go, I just want to say it seems a little silly that we're talking about something that happened 150 years ago. And maybe after today, you won't have to hear us talk about this anymore. None of you will. It'll be over with and done, and we can get on to some other things that are more relevant. Thank you.
All right. Stephen Katz. And I think I've called, let me go ahead and call some more, Stephen, while you're coming up. Janet Hewitt, Charles Young. I think I've already called Janet and Charles. Kenneth Golphin, Liz Sheehan, forgive me if I mispronounce anybody. Seth Giles and Tom Randolph.
I'm Steve Katz, and I live in a home in, on Clyde Street that I own in the 2nd District. I'm not originally from Lexington, but I have lived here for 23 and a half years, and I've seen a lot of change in that time. I'm a native of Paterson, New Jersey. When I came here, and I hope I'm not offending anybody, but I was shocked to have encountered a few black Lexingtonians that looked to me like they might have been scraping and shuffling a little bit. And it prompted me to look into the history of the town that I had moved to, and I learned that, well, there's a reason for that. They had been intimidated through decades, even centuries, by a power structure that was intent on keeping them in their place, that would erect statues honoring the Secretary of War from the Confederacy, the traitor Breckinridge, and the terrorist Morgan, alongside the steps up to the courthouse to make sure that people knew they ain't getting justice there from these folks. But things have changed. That was then. It's a different day. When I came here originally, I couldn't find a black man in Lexington that was a Kentucky fan. They were all Louisville fans. Because they remembered Adolph Rupp, who's buried in the Lexington Cemetery not too far from Breckinridge and Morgan. Things have changed, and we've got to change along with them. One of the things that's changing in the world today is that there's never been a time, I don't believe, that Lexington has had more eyes focused on it in the world than right now. This is bigger than these concerns that I've just expressed and that other people have expressed. The whole world is watching, and you got to make a statement. You got to show some leadership. You've done great work. One of the biggest changes that I've seen in the time that I've been in Lexington have been the advances made by this council in recent years, where we passed a minimum wage hike. Even though it was overruled, you stepped to the plate. Where you passed an affordable housing trust fund. Where you've shown concern for the whole community. The whole community needs your leadership now. Be unanimous about it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Janet Hewitt.
I'm Janet Hewitt. I cede my time to Robin Code.
All right, Robin.
First of all, I just want to say that I'm grateful that this meeting is happening and that the campaign has made it this far. But what we are doing today should have been done at least 2 years ago. Waiting to do this, waiting to do the right thing by moving these statues has endangered our entire community, our whole city, and mostly the people who have already been endangered by the presence of those statues and the behaviors that they encourage and reinforce. So I just want to say to you all that I really hope we use this as a learning opportunity so that the next time black people tell us that something is harmful to them, we know better, white people know better than to argue otherwise. And I'd like to repeat something that was said earlier. Not to act is to act. Not to speak is to speak. So I ask you, please unanimously vote to move these statues and never make this mistake again.
All right, thank you, Robin. I had Janet Hewitt. Charles Young is Charles. Kenneth Gulpin. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, fellow Lexington citizens. I was born and raised in the shadow of Stone Mountain, Georgia, where there are monuments to Confederate soldiers hanging on a wall on a mountainside that every time we drive by, we can't help but realize what is going on. And so therefore, I want to talk to you. I've been in Lexington area now since '98, and I want to talk to you about sanitizing history and about intimidation. Let me suggest first that intimidation is also often claimed to be non-intentional, but it really cannot be denied. The segregation and disenfranchisement laws known as Jim Crow that represented a former codified system of racial apartheid that dominated the American South for 3/4 of a century began in the 1890s. I bring that out because we talk a lot in this room today about the Civil War, but we haven't talked about Reconstruction and what Reconstruction tried to do and how Reconstruction ended in 1877. And after that, Jim Crow laws began. This is important because these statues are erected in this park right during the time of Jim Crow laws. And so if you want to talk about intimidation, talk about the fact that persons who were still alive at the time of the erection of these statues, who had been sold at auction, persons who are still alive, were not consulted, were not thought about when the decision was made to place these statues there. I had the honor in 2006 to serve the St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church on Upper Street. And one of the things about St. Paul, it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And in the back of St. Paul, there's a hidden doorway to an area above the sanctuary where slaves had opportunity to hide for 1 to 2 days on their way trying to get to freedom. And I was told by persons from Transylvania University when they brought them in for tours, brought students in for tours, that they were able, because buildings were not as tall in those days, to see as far as Cheapside. And so you had persons trying to get to freedom, watching others being sold there. When you did not consult them for placing of those statues, that's a form of intimidation. Now, in 2017, we have the opportunity to have a voice where our ancestors had no voice. It would be bad for us to not speak up and to suggest that those statues need to be replaced and sent to the cemetery where they belong, and not be in a place where our foreparents, our forefathers were treated inhumanely, treated without dignity and without respect, and to allow them to continue to be treated without respect. I urge you as a council to adopt the resolution to move those statues, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Liz Sheehan?
Hello, everybody. I'm Liz Sheehan. I'm in District 5. I'm here to support the removal of the statues. Societies are built on rules and conventions. In our society, one of those conventions is that we use monuments and statues to honor people and events. We've heard people point to perceived good actions of John Breckinridge and John Hunt Morgan, but those do not outweigh the long list of reasons why they should not be honored. I am a teacher. I've been a teacher for over 10 years. These statues are not about educating us on history. They are a symbol of oppression. To make matters worse, they stand in a place where so many people were abused. In their actions, Breckinridge and Morgan supported that oppression and abuse. This still affects our community today and is stunting our growth as a city of compassion and a city that welcomes all people. Based on our society's conventions, we are honoring these men and the Confederacy by keeping those statues. That is not right. It was not right when they were erected. It isn't right now. It is well past time to remove these statues. For the argument that this is erasing or sanitizing history, I have 2 points. The first is removing these statues does not stop us from learning about these men, the Civil War, or the Confederacy. I learned about these well before I ever saw these statues. Secondly, letting these statues remain at Cheapside is minimizing and disrespecting the history of the thousands of people who were sold as slaves in that location. Those are the people that should be honored. Let's not delay this anymore. I urge for you to call for a second reading tonight if that is required for this resolution, and to vote unanimously so that there is no doubt that Lexington will fight against oppression, racism, and hatred. Thank you for hearing my statement today.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe I've already called for Seth Giles. Yep. And Tom Randolph, Pamela James, Daniel Goulding, Layman Swan, and Joel Edwards.
Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. If you build a political controversy over Confederate monuments, troublemakers will come. The mayor and city council in Charlottesville built a political controversy in Charlottesville, and troublemakers who wanted to engage in violence came in force. Either through design or incompetence, the mayor of Charlottesville and the governor of Virginia, in my opinion, allowed for violence to get out of hand in Charlottesville. That resulted in the death of a peaceful protester. Many people were beaten severely. Many were attacked with chemicals, urine, and feces by those who had come, many wearing masks, to violently protest and beat the protesters who were protesting the removal of the Lee Monument at Lee Park. If the alt-right comes to protest the removal of the monuments in Lexington, the alt-left will come prepared to beat them and attack them with chemicals as they have attacked conservatives in Charlottesville, Berkeley, California, Southern California, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. We might not agree with the protesters of the alt-right, but they have a constitutional right to congregate peacefully and say or chant whatever they want. I doubt the Lexington mayor and the Lexington police are prepared for what might come. The Virginia State Police were not effective when the going got tough. The Virginia State Police left Lee Park because it was, quote, too dangerous, unquote, to stay. I suggest you take some time and let things calm down in this country regarding the monuments to the Confederate heroes of the war between the states. Try to think of an alternative. Why not take the fortune, perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars, that it might cost to remove the monuments and put that money toward an exhibit about the 5,000-year history of slavery, an institution which is alive and well today from what I have read. Why not put up a monument celebrating Frederick Douglass? Why not a monument celebrating the Native Americans who were here before us? Do they not matter? Why not take some time and rethink what you are going to do regarding the monuments and Cheapside? I like the idea of a monument to the woman who sued Henry Clay for her freedom. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Seth?
It's Cass.
Oh, Cass. I couldn't
sorry,
read it
my
very easily.
handwriting.
Sorry.
Well, I happened to hear a lot earlier about how the statues of Breckenridge and Morgan are statues of important people from important families. And, you know, I'd like to say that there are a lot of important families that were broken up by the slave trade, people who were separated from their wives and children and treated as chattel. Those people were important too. They might not have had, you know, fancy titles. They might not have had, you know, land or wealth or political office. Those people don't get statues, but they were important. They were just as important as everyone else, because I believe that every human being is equal. Every human being has a right to dignity. And I read an article recently about the so-called Forgotten 44 abolitionists who were arrested in Kentucky, and they were just recently pardoned for their crime posthumously in 2010 or so. These people deserve a statue, like Gillette Miles, who served 3 years' time for stealing her own children. Those people are important. Those are people. That's history that has been erased. That's history that's been sanitized by things like this statue that creates a narrative that the important people are white, wealthy landowners. Well, everyone is important, and everyone who has suffered and fought for their rights deserves some kind of honor, some kind of respect. And one last thing is just, speaking of history, it was the historian Howard Zinn who said that it was the countless acts of ordinary people who lead to the great moments in history, not great generals, not vice presidents. It's people, ordinary people, the same kind of people who the grassroots campaigns that have been trying to create justice and equality in this modern age. And speaking of justice and equality, it was also MLK who said that we must not have a negative peace, which is an absence of tension, but instead we must work for a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. And thank you.
Thank you, Cass. Pamela?
Hi, my name is Pam James, and I live on Bordeaux Drive over by Versailles in a very beautifully diverse neighborhood. A friend of mine today mentioned that there wasn't any reason to take these statues down because most people walked by them and didn't even notice them anyway. And I said to her, people didn't notice them if they're white and if they're not looking to those statues as a symbol of their hate. They notice them if they are downtrodden by those statues. Most of the statues were erected at times of Jim Crow and the civil rights movement in bad faith in order to put people down. It is time in Lexington, where one was erected right where people were enslaved in chains, to take these statues down. There is no time to waste. It is time to do this, and it's time to do it quickly. Please ask your other committee that you need to get permission from to have an emergency meeting and get this work done quickly so that our city can heal and move on, because it's not about history, it's about our future. It's about the future of our whole country. And we can start in this room with your votes on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Danielle Goulding? Danielle in? And then Layman.
Hi, my name is Danielle Goulding. I live on 2nd Street. Thank you for your time here today. The claim of some that relocating these statues is whitewashing Kentucky's history is absurd. The very presence and prominence of the statues in the heart of our city, that is the whitewashing of our history. There is no equally grand or eye-catching memorial that tells the story of the human lives that were traded here as slaves. These statues represent the glorification of the Confederacy and everything it stood for. I am not proud of our city or state's history of being divided over the right to enslave another human, nor am I proud of our part in being one of the busiest slave trading hubs in the South. But I am proud of the people here today who have fought for equality and inclusivity. In this moment, these statues do not tell a story of Southern pride and heritage. They represent the divide in our community and our country over how we acknowledge the institutionalized discrimination that still exists for non-white Americans. We as a society need to take ownership of our nation's awful deeds and begin to make atonement for it. That begins with the removal of these statues. Our state has a complicated our state has a complicated history in its part of the Civil War. Kentucky has straddled the fence of the Confederacy and slavery versus the Union and equality. Our city needs to step boldly and loudly away from that past. We need to reject these relics of hate and place them in a museum where they belong, or alternatively, the pit downtown.
All right.
I urge you to please vote unanimously. Please vote unanimously to remove these statues from the heart of our city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You do know your geography. All right. I think is Lamine, yes. Excuse me. Lamine. And Lamine, while you're, if I may call some other folks up. Joel Edwards, Brian Chenoweth, Anthony Everett, Reverend Anthony Everett, and Representative Kelly Flood.
Good afternoon, Council, Mayor, and others in the room. My name is Lamine Swan. I reside on Whispering Hills Drive in Lexington. I was going to talk about history, talk to my recent relationship with slavery, just make it short. My great-great-grandfather was born in 1849, was a slave, died in 1939. His granddaughter, my grandmother, 90 years young, is still living. That's how close I am to slavery. Going to Cheapside, if you look at history, Cheapside, take that back, the statues were put there for one sole reason. That was the city center back in history. So it was put there for systemic discrimination, racism, hate, fear. And if these statues stay, I hope you have unanimous support to have these removed, begin the process with Frankfurt. If you do not remove these, this is going to lay another generation or two of systemic discrimination through schools, busing, housing, psychologically. It's going to say, hey, we can leave it here. So to make it short and sweet, looks like they've already have done it on the Hunt Morgan statue right now for protection during the construction. There's plywood up already. So I would make suggestions for the Breckenridge statue. Go to Lowe's, $10, throw up plywood until we can go to the next step with the Military Heritage Commission, and until the statues are removed. And to the commission, there's spiritual, that was a civil rights song. Ain't nobody going to turn me around.
Thank you, Lamine. Thank you very much. Next, I think I called Joel Edwards. Brian Chenoweth. Is Joel or Brian? Reverend Everett. Oh, Joel. Yes, sir. Come ahead.
I'm Brian Chenoweth.
Yeah, Brian. Yes, sir. Please, come ahead. And Reverend Everett.
Yeah. I'm Reverend Brian Chenoweth, a proud resident of District 9, where also the church I serve, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Lexington, also resides. Unitarian Universalism is a historic, radically progressive faith that has been with this country since the founding of this country. And I share that with you not to pat ourselves on the back, but to say to all of you tonight that should you choose to be on the side of courage, we will be with you. And should you continue to be afraid that some white nationalists are going to come down from Indiana, we will be with you. And I say to that, let them come. Let them come to Lexington and see that Black Lives Matter. Let us show them that Black Lives Matter. Let them come to Lexington and see our love for our city by how we unite against the forces of hate, and let them come so that they can see we chose the side of courage. Dear friends, be not afraid. All the scriptures tell us that no matter what your religion is. Be not afraid. Choose the side of courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Reverend Everett.
Reverend Anthony Everett. I am pastor at Wesley United Methodist Church here in Lexington, District 1, resident of District 12. I happen to also be an at-large state human rights commissioner for the state of Kentucky. I want to speak to the spirit. I'm a minister, a Christian minister, and in coming to Kentucky, because I'm not originally from Kentucky, in 2008, I was told about Cheapside. I learned about Cheapside and the history there, and I learned that this was a slave auction block. And immediately I saw all the other things that were going on. I saw the statues that were there, and I was disheartened because I could sense the crying out of the souls of the people that died there, the people who were sold into slavery there at Cheapside. Too often we miss out on the fact that these people were real people at that time. And being real people and having a spiritual component to them, sometimes we just overlook all of that because of our present day. We have the different things that are going on there. So we see this statue, these statues of these men who were enslavers, who were for the Confederacy. And I say to you today, we can't live with this anymore. When I see African Americans who are ashamed of Cheapside, I see African Americans who speak to this issue today and that are fearful for speaking out. We can't have any more fear in our lives because of this issue. I want to ask you to please vote unanimously against, to get rid of the statues. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little passionate here. But please vote unanimously. Let's tell the world what Lexington is all about, who we are. Let us bring another spirit to Cheapside. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Representative Kelly Flood.
Good people. I imagine you are proud of all of us tonight. Those who have found the voice within, whether they've ever spoken before, came out tonight. There are so many good people out on the street. Horns have been honking. Joy is helping mitigate the fear. That's how we get through most of our troubles in life. Living with fear and finding the joy and the gratitude of good neighbors who really have our backs. That's how we get through. So if we keep one another's back right now, and we do this together, not wholly even understanding where we're going to end up yet, but we stay together, our beautiful, beautiful bluegrass will support us, take us deep, carry us through, and we will be neighbors for the long haul. Let's do this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Juanita Galvin. Have I pronounced that correctly, Juanita? Oh, yes, right. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
And while you're coming up to the podium, Juanita, if I may call a few other folks, Donna Holton, Seth Holton, Sarah Holton, Amit Lowe, and Lawrence Kent. All right, Juanita, please go right ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me? Because I
Yes,
can't
ma'am.
hear myself. Not that I want to. But seriously, folks, a lot has been said tonight. And I think we need to, as human beings, take a moment, silent prayer for the young lady and for the family in Charlottesville. Do you mind doing that? Please guard her beautiful soul and take it into heaven. And now I just want to say the last thing that I didn't get to say on Tuesday, and that was that there are markers at Cheapside behind the old courthouse that's being renovated into a visitor center. I have called the mayor's office, and I have been informed that those markers that depict and state that slaves were stolen there will be put back on the property at the visitor center. Now, I am most opposed to that because I know after tonight that the statues will be removed. So the people who originally started the removal of the statues had said no reference to slavery. It should all be eradicated. So I see irony there, and I see a strong request from me and from a lot of citizens that those markers depicting that slaves were sold on that property, and now it's going to be a visitor center, that those should not be put back, and that they should be put in a place a history, a museum. And there's no doubt in my mind that those statues will be removed, and it will be taking, people who've grown up here. We just got accustomed to it, and just like a lot of people who came into our city, didn't pay much attention, but in a reference to those historical markers, I highly recommend, because we'll be back to square one if those are put back to the visitor center. Some people are arguing that the statues will not be appropriate, and I agree, saying that would not be very welcoming to people who come to our community. Neither would the people who work downtown and who have such deep feeling about slavery that it hurts their feelings. And yes, if I could take your pain, I would take it, but I cannot. So, city officials, please do not put those historical markers regarding slavery back on the property.
Right.
Thank you.
Juanita, thank you. All right, next is Donna Holton and then Sarah Holton.
I'm Donna Holton. I'm going to cede my time to Rabbi David Wertschafter from Temple 8th Israel.
Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, City Council. Thank you to everyone here. God of our mothers and fathers, there are people beyond this room watching and listening and participating tonight. Let the record show, Mayor Gray and City Council, that this issue is so deep in the heart of Lexingtonians that there are people gathered on the balcony outside, there are people gathered in the foyer downstairs, there are people gathered in the street to celebrate what we hope and pray, Mayor, will be a historic moment when this City Council unanimously moves that the statues come down. Our Jewish tradition says that there's a very simple thing. It's called in Hebrew the ikar, the essence of a thing. And the essence of the thing is what a great Rabbi Hillel once said to a man who came to him to play a practical joke. And the man says, "Rabbi, teach me the whole Torah, all of Scripture, while I stand on one foot." So Hillel thinks about it for a moment and tries to come up with a way not to take the bait and replies, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. Go and learn it."